With a sickening crack, the door burst open. Frost exploded outward, coating them in a fine spray of ice. Mark stepped in front of Sarah, swinging his axe. Inside, darkness hung thick and heavy, illuminated only by the dim glow of the emergency lights flickering overhead. The tapping grew louder, scrambling, clattering, dragging itself closer, and then it came. Rushing forward, Mark swung again and again, each blow echoing in the cavernous space. But what he had expected to hit was nothing. He slashed through empty air. Panting, he lowered his axe. Maybe it was just the sound of the storm, some trick of the wind. Just as he turned to Sarah, something lunged at him. Adrenaline surging, Mark shoved the thing backward. It hissed, slithering off balance. For a moment, their eyes met. Terror flooded his. What he saw on the other side of the door was not human. Its skin was a patchwork of rotten flesh, stitched together with sinew. A tangle of limbs and tentacles writhed and twisted beneath its torn rags of clothing. Its face, once human, was now a rotting mask of teeth and eyes. Its tongue flicked out, tasting the air. "Run!" Mark gasped, stumbling backward. But it was too late. With inhuman speed, it lunged again. Barely dodging, Mark fell to his knees. Fear threatened to consume him. But then something struck him. The creature paused, sensing the danger. Before it could react, Mark tossed the ice axe. It sailed through the air, spinning end over end, catching the creature on the side of its head. With a screech of pure rage, the thing recoiled. Seizing the opportunity, Mark scrambled away. But the battle was far from over. It scuttled toward him, dragging itself along the floor with its mangled arms. Mark ran for the opening, the icy wind whipping across his face. Behind him, the creature clawed at the door, its nails scraping against the metal. It wouldn't be contained forever. Mark knew he couldn't outrun the thing forever. Glancing back, he saw that the creature had managed to claw its way through the door. It shambled toward him, its gaze burning with hatred. With a desperate surge of adrenaline, Mark stumbled to his feet and broke into a run. The wind tore at him, biting his face with ice. He risked a glance over his shoulder. The creature had stopped, and then, to his horror, it leaped. It glided through the air like a horrifying winged demon, landing gracefully on the snow. Its eyes locked onto his. And then it spread its arms, baring its twisted, fanged grin. "Come play with me," it rasped, its voice a chorus of whispers. Panic surged through him. Mark knew he couldn't escape. He turned and charged straight for the creature. As it lunged, he dodged, tumbling in the snow. Scrambling to his feet, he punched it as hard as he could, connecting with the side of its rotting face. It reeled back, surprised by the blow. With a roar of anger, it lunged again. Mark rolled aside, grabbing his axe. As it came closer, he brought the axe down hard, burying it deep in its shoulder. The creature shrieked, thrashing wildly. Mark held on tight, bracing for the impact. It bucked, trying to dislodge him, but he dug his feet into the snow and held firm. The creature's struggles grew weaker. It collapsed, collapsing into the snow, its body convulsing. With a final shudder, it lay still. Mark pulled the axe free, splattering blood and gore. But the victory was short-lived. A new sound now echoed across the ice, heavy, dragging footsteps. Turning slowly, Mark faced his next nightmare. Emerging from the swirling snow was something huge, its footsteps leaving deep gouges in the ice. Its skin was like tire stretched taut over bulbous muscles. A single red eye burned with an unholy light. Its jaws, lined with rows of razor-sharp teeth, gaped open. Mark raised his axe, fear lending him strength. As the giant advanced, the earth trembled beneath its feet. For a moment, their eyes met. And then the monster lunged. Mark swung, his axe singing through the air. It connected with the side of the creature's head, bouncing harmlessly off its thick skin. The giant roared, swatting at him with a meaty hand. Mark rolled away, scrambling out of its reach. He could feel the heat of its breath on his face, smell the stench of decay and rot. The creature took another step closer. In the brief lull, Mark noticed something. The eye. It wasn't looking at him. It was focused on something behind him. That same beckoning gesture, those same twisted lips curling into a cruel smile. Mark followed its gaze and gasped. Behind him, the remains of the plane were crumbling apart, revealing something underneath. A staircase made of bone. It spiraled into the darkness, disappearing into the belly of the earth. The giant was watching him, beckoning with an impatient gesture. Mark hesitated. He knew he should run, but his feet were rooted to the spot. The giant took another step closer, its shadowed form looming over him. It loomed over him. Reaching out, it touched his shoulder, its fingers like hooks. But it wasn't painful. It was strangely comforting. "Why are you here?" it asked, its voice a rumble of thunder. Mark stared at the bone stairs, then back at the creature. "I followed the coordinates my father left me," he said quietly. "He said there was a plane here and something inside it. He never told me what." The giant nodded slowly. "Your father knew more than he let on. He was one of us." It gestured with its head toward the bone stairs. "Then what are you?" Mark asked, his voice barely a whisper. The giant regarded him for a long moment. "This is where our story begins," it said finally, "and soon it will be your story too." The giant stepped back, revealing the staircase once more. "Go on," it beckoned. "You are needed down there." Mark hesitated, his mind racing. He knew he shouldn't go down into the darkness, but something was drawing him. Curiosity, perhaps, or a sense of duty to his father. Whatever it was, he was determined to find out the truth. Taking a deep breath, he started down the stairs. The giant watched him go, its single eye gleaming in the shadows. As he descended, the temperature dropped. The air grew heavy, stale, and damp. The stairs creaked ominously, echoing his every step. The faint glow of emergency lights flickered ahead, casting long, dancing shadows. He walked on, his curiosity battling with his fear. The stairs ended abruptly at a solid metal door. Etched into the surface was a symbol he recognized from his father's journal. The giant stood just beyond the door, its form silhouetted against the eerie glow. "Are you ready?" it rumbled. Mark took a deep breath, steeling himself. "As I'll ever be," he replied, reaching for the handle. As the door slid open, revealing the dark void beyond, the giant stepped aside. "Welcome home, son of William," it said, its voice echoing in the vast emptiness. Mark entered, closing the door behind him. The last thing he saw was the giant's single eye gleaming with an otherworldly light. Then, he was plunged into darkness. The wind screamed outside, carrying with it the whispers of the past. Mark stood frozen in the darkness, the weight of his decision crushing him. The giant's words echoed in his mind. Was this where his story began? He had come seeking answers, but now he wasn't so sure he wanted them. Still, he had come too far to turn back. He reached out, feeling his way forward. The darkness pressed in, heavy and suffocating. And then he saw it. A faint glimmer in the distance, a beacon in the overwhelming black. Hope surged through him. He moved toward the light, each step echoing his determination. As he got closer, the details sharpened. Machinery hummed, gears spun, and a faint glow illuminated rows upon rows of instruments. Mark stepped into a vast chamber, his eyes widening in awe. In the center, a towering obelisk hummed with power, its surface covered in intricate patterns. Around it, figures clad in shimmering robes worked diligently, their movements precise, their faces serene. Mark stood mesmerized, caught between wonder and fear. His journey had led him to this very moment, but what was he supposed to do now? The obelisk pulsed with energy, its light bathing the chamber in an ethereal glow, and then it turned toward him, its energy flaring. Startled, Mark stumbled back. The figures in robes turned, their eyes fixed on him. He had been discovered. As they advanced, their expressions unreadable, Mark felt a chill creep up his spine. He had stumbled into a world hidden from his own, a realm of secrets and power that he had never imagined existed. Now he had to find a way out. "I am never going back to that damn museum," Mark swore under his breath as they trundled through the snowdrifts in near silence. Sarah could hear the wind snatching at the flapping canvas of their makeshift sled, crunching the frozen ground beneath them and swirling around them in miniature whirlwinds. She knew he was right, but she couldn't help glancing back at the receding white plain on the horizon. It looked so fragile against the endless expanse of the Antarctic tundra, like a fallen leaf clinging to the last vestiges of autumn in the teeth of winter. The wind shifted, and the familiar metallic tang of blood filled her nostrils. Sarah shivered. She wanted to tell Mark, but when she tried to speak, only a hoarse croak came out. She pressed her lips together tightly, refusing to give up. But after a while, Mark slowed the sled and gestured for her to wait. He scrambled down into a shallow depression in the ice, which gave Sarah an excellent view of him discovering nothing. With a shrug, he clambered back up, and they continued on. It was slow, exhausting work. And soon enough, Sarah was starting to lose hope. Her eyelids grew heavy. Each gust of wind stole away whatever little body heat she had left. She imagined slipping into unconsciousness, being swept away by the blizzard into the uncaring embrace of the frozen wastelands. Maybe Mark would find her, maybe he wouldn't. What did it matter? Then, through the swirling snow, Sarah thought she saw something, some movement up ahead. She pointed, half hoping it was nothing, anything to take her mind off the encroaching cold. There, Mark saw it too. A shape like a boulder, like a grave marker, or maybe like a tomb. But it was different. It was odd. In the distance, she could see Mark get up on his feet, his arms stretched high. He'd spotted it too. Now he was calling out, "Sarah, come quick!" As they drew nearer, she could make out the shape more clearly. It was a rock monolith, tall and slender, and it had writing carved into its surface. Together, they peered into the swirling snow at the inscription. It was definitely there. Letters chiseled into the stone, letters from a language that neither of them could decipher. As Sarah reached out to try to touch it, Mark grabbed her wrist. "Let's go," he hissed. "Whatever's here isn't friendly." Relief flooded her, and she let him lead her away. They didn't have to go far. Just a few 100 feet away, set in a curve of the ice sheet, was another depression in the landscape. It wasn't natural. It was man-made, a depression dug into the ice. And from the center of it, something glinted in the sunlight. Mark's boots crunched on the frozen ground as he made his way to the object. It was a small, battered metal box. The corners were sharp, the paint long scratched away. The box was locked, but Mark found a keyhole and inserted a slim piece of metal he'd been carrying. He turned it gently, and the lock clicked open. Then Mark looked up, his face pale, his hands shaking. The box was empty. He turned back to Sarah, his eyes wide. "There should have been something in there," he whispered. Sarah joined him, leaning close to peer into the hollow chamber. There was nothing but dust. In the distance, the white plain was now just a smudge on the horizon. The blizzard raged around them, hiding the tracks they'd made and the tracks that might have been made by others. They spent the night in the shelter of the rock monolith. Mark curled around a small fire he made from dry grasses he'd somehow managed to find, huddled together for warmth and watching the blizzard rage. Neither of them slept. By the time the storm passed, the world was white again. The wind died down and a bright blue sky spread overhead, mocking the black hole that yawned in the place where their hope had been. The sled was still there, but the box was gone. The monolith was bare. And now they were really alone. "What do we do now?" Sarah asked. Mark rose to his feet, brushing snow off his clothes. "We head south," he said grimly. "If the plane crashed anywhere nearby, that's where we'll find it." As they trudged across the white expanse, they found more monoliths, more markers of a presence that was both ancient and unknown. And with every mile they traveled, the silence pressed in on them, heavier and colder than the blizzard had been. They were on the edge of the ice sheet now, and below them, the land dipped to a lower elevation. The wind picked up again, tugging at Sarah's clothes, pulling her toward the abyss. Suddenly, the ground beneath their feet seemed to heave. The earth rumbled. From far below, something massive stirred. Mark stumbled, catching himself on Sarah's sled. Then he began to climb down onto the slope below. "Look!" he shouted over the wind. He was pointing at a break in the ice sheet, a crack in the frozen wasteland that shouldn't have been there. A deep red glow was coming from within. "What is that?" Sarah whispered, fear gripping her. As she slid down to join him, the glow intensified, turning day into night. A low rumble echoed from the crack as something huge emerged into the twilight. Sarah felt her breath catch in her throat. The sight before her defied explanation. It was unlike anything she could have ever imagined. At the bottom of the fissure, bathed in red light, was a massive doorway crafted from metal. It hummed with power, pulsating like a heartbeat. Strange symbols covered its surface, and from behind it, shadows flickered, moving in a silent dance. Cautiously, Mark approached the door, running his gloved hand over its cool surface. A low hum resonated from the metal, vibrating in his bones. Suddenly, a section of the door slid aside, revealing a glimpse of what lay beyond. Warm air spilled out, carrying with it the scent of flowers, fresh, sweet, like life after death. Sarah's eyes widened. She wanted to run, to flee from this impossible sight, but her feet felt rooted to the spot. A gentle light emanated from the opening, beckoning, and from the other side, a voice echoed, soft and sweet, like bird song. "Come," it whispered. "It's time to go home." Mark placed his hand on the door, hesitantly stepping inside. Sarah watched him go, her heart pounding. She wanted to call out, to warn him, but no sound came out. She tried to move, but her legs refused to obey. The humming grew louder, wrapping around her like a shroud. She closed her eyes, bracing for whatever awaited her. When she finally dared to open them, she found herself inside the plane. The cabin was warm, cozy, alive. Outside, the blizzard raged, but here, there was only peace. She could feel Mark beside her, his hand reaching out to steady her. "I found it," he whispered, his voice filled with awe. "The source of the signal. It's in here." His fingers tightened on hers. "We have to go back," he added, urgency edging into his tone. "We have to show everyone." But Sarah couldn't tear her eyes away from the scene outside the plane's windows. She could see it still. The crimson glow, the dancing shadows, the open door. It was calling to her, whispering promises of warmth and light. She could almost feel the pull of it, the urge to step through the threshold and leave all of this behind. "Sarah," Mark said, his voice echoing in her ears. But she couldn't respond. She couldn't tear her gaze away from the impossible spectacle. The light from the doorway seemed to reach out, touching her soul. The hum resonated deep within her, stirring memories that weren't hers, emotions that she'd never known. Suddenly, a figure emerged from the light, tall, thin, dressed in a pilot's uniform from a bygone era. He smiled warmly, extending a hand towards her. "Grandpa," she breathed, her voice catching in her throat. It couldn't be, but it was. Her grandfather, the explorer who'd vanished all those years ago, stood before her, his eyes shining with a strange, otherworldly light. She turned to Mark, his face etched with worry. He mouthed the question, "What do we do?" But before Sarah could reply, her grandfather was by her side, his hand firmly clasped in hers. "Come," he said, his voice rich with an unearthly resonance. "I've been waiting for you." And with that, he led her towards the humming doorway, leaving Mark and the plane behind. The last thing she heard was Mark's desperate cry echoing in the frozen wasteland. "Sarah, no!" But she couldn't turn back. The hum was enveloping her, drawing her in, promising secrets that had lain dormant for decades. She stepped through the doorway, leaving the world she knew behind. The pilot stepped forward, his voice a whisper that roared inside their heads. "They've smelled you! You can't run now!" Sarah's hand shook. "What are they?" "The reason this door stayed closed for 73 years. The hallway behind them flickered. One moment, the plane's interior. The next, the frozen tundra. And then, something else entirely. A black desert under 3 moons. A forest where the trees had human faces. An endless staircase spiraling into light. Each flicker came faster than the last. The pilot looked at Mark. "You can step forward and leave this world behind, or shut the door and pretend you never saw this." Mark's grip on Sarah tightened. The creatures were seconds away. The hallway behind them was collapsing into the void. And just as Mark decided, the door slammed shut on its own. A blinding white flash. Mark gasped. Cold air bit into his lungs. They were standing in the tundra again. The wind howled like before. Snow crunched under their boots. The plane was gone. Sarah spun in circles. "Mark, this is the same spot." But it's not. The mountains in the distance had shifted, their peaks sharper, almost unnatural. The sky wasn't the soft blue they remembered. It was too blue, like painted glass. Mark looked down. The snow was fresh, untouched. Their own footprints from before were missing. "Sarah, how did we get here? If the plane's gone, where's the wreckage?" Sarah pointed. In the distance, a shadow stood against the wind. It wasn't moving. It wasn't human-shaped either. Taller, thinner, head tilted at an impossible angle. The moment Mark blinked, it was closer. Sarah froze. "Mark, did you hear that?" A voice slithered through the air. Familiar. It was the pilot. "You didn't choose. So I chose for you." The shadow in the snow began to smile. And that's when Mark realized the tundra they returned to wasn't Earth at all. Mark couldn't stop staring at the mountains. They weren't just there. They were breathing, slowly rising and falling like the chest of some giant creature buried beneath the snow. Sarah pulled out her compass. The needle spun wildly, then stopped, not pointing north but toward the shadow. "That's impossible." "It's magnetic," Sarah whispered. The shadow was still smiling. Mark bent down to touch the snow. It wasn't cold. It wasn't even snow. It was ash. White ash that crumbled into dust between his fingers. A faint smell of burning filled the air. The wind stopped. Completely. Not a sound in the entire tundra. Sarah looked up. The clouds above them were frozen in place, painted in the sky like an image, unmoving. "Mark, I think we're inside something." Not outside. In front of them, fresh footprints appeared in the ash. 1, 2, 3, leading away toward a dark outline in the distance. It was the plane. But it wasn't wrecked. It stood tall, polished, as if it had just landed. But when they stepped inside, they'd realized the plane had been waiting for them all along. The plane's door creaked open. But instead of the cold, rotting smell of an abandoned wreck, it smelled like coffee, fresh, warm. Inside, lights hummed softly. The cabin was clean, untouched, like a flight frozen mid-journey. Mark moved through the aisle, his boots sinking slightly into the carpet. Every seat had a coat, a scarf, a half-finished drink, but no people. Sarah whispered, "It's like they just vanished." Mark spotted a folder in the cockpit. A flight manifest. He flipped through it. His blood ran cold. Passenger number 17, Mark. Harris passenger number 18, Sarah Cole. The dates weren't from the past. They were from tomorrow. Sarah sat in the pilot's seat without thinking. The moment she touched the controls, the cockpit screens flickered to life. A calm, digital voice spoke. All. Passengers present. Preparing for departure. The plane's door slammed shut on its own. The windows outside went black. Not night, not storm, just nothing. The engines started to hum. They weren't taking off into the sky. They were going somewhere else. And when they found out where, it was already too late to turn back. Mark grabbed Sarah's arm. This isn't possible. The engines. But when he looked out of the cockpit window, there were no wings. The body of the plane floated in pitch-black nothingness, as if the world outside had been erased. The calm, digital voice returned. Estimated time of arrival. 1 hour. Mark shouted into the empty air. Arrival where? The voice replied, You'll know when you're ready. On the dashboard, the flight timer wasn't counting forward. It was counting backward. 59, 59, 58, 59, 57. Every second that passed felt heavier, as if pulling them toward something they couldn't escape. A faint light appeared in the black void ahead. It wasn't a city. It wasn't land. It was a door. A massive, floating door, hundreds of feet, tall, covered in strange symbols. It pulsed slowly, like it was breathing. From the seats behind them came a whisper. It wasn't one voice. It was dozens speaking at once. They weren't speaking to each other. They were speaking to Mark. Welcome home. And when that door finally opened, the plane wasn't the only thing that went inside. The plane drifted closer to the door until it filled every window. The strange symbols carved into it shifted as they watched, like they were alive, rearranging into words in a language none of them knew. With a low, bone-deep rumble, the door began to open. Not outward, not inward, but sideways, like two slabs of reality sliding apart. Mark leaned forward. He expected darkness, maybe stars, maybe nothing. Instead, there was a city, suspended upside down in the sky as if gravity had been rewritten. Towers stretched into an endless horizon of clouds, their windows glowing faintly red, like the entire place was breathing. A sudden wave of warm air rolled through the plane, carrying a scent so strong it made Sarah gag. It wasn't decay. It wasn't blood. It was home cooking, like the smell of her grandmother's kitchen, but heavier, almost drugging her senses. The cockpit radio crackled to life again. Only this time it wasn't one voice. It was thousands, whispering, chanting, murmuring things too fast to understand. But one phrase cut through the noise. Don't look down. Mark froze. Slowly, he glanced at the floor of the cockpit, and his jaw locked. It was glass, and beneath it he saw faces staring up. Not from below the plane, from inside the glass itself. And then one of those faces opened its mouth and spoke his name. Mark's breath caught in his throat. The face beneath the glass wasn't just looking at him. It was mimicking him. Every twitch of his lips, every flicker of fear in his eyes, it copied in perfect sync. Then, the mouth of that thing moved out of sync, and in a voice identical. To his dead father's, it said, Mark, we've been waiting. Sarah grabbed his arm, but her hand sank into the glass like it was water. She screamed and yanked back. Her skin was covered in tiny bite marks. The whole plane shuddered violently. The door to the impossible city yawned wider, and the glowing towers began to lean toward them, as if the city itself was moving closer. From the void between the buildings, shapes began to emerge. Not human, not animal. Long, thin, spider-like, but walking upright, each step making a sound like breaking bones. A blast of cold so sharp it burned swept through the cockpit. Every window frosted over except the one facing the open door. And in that frame, one of the tall, spindly creatures tilted its head and smiled. Its teeth were too many. Far, far too many. Mark turned to slam the door shut. But the cockpit latch was gone. In its place, There was a single human finger, perfectly preserved, like it had been frozen in time. The chanting from the radio grew louder. No longer whispers. It was now screams. And then silence. That's when something tapped from inside the glass floor. The dim beam from Alex's flashlight quivered as he swept it across the narrow fuselage. Frost clung to every surface, glittering like tiny shards of broken glass. The air inside felt heavier now, thicker somehow, like the plane itself was, holding its breath. A faint crack echoed from the rear of the cabin. Alex froze mid-step. His breath fogged in front of him, but it wasn't from the cold. It was from the sudden spike of fear crawling up his spine. "Did you hear that?" whispered Daniel, his voice barely audible. Alex nodded slowly, his eyes darting toward the source of the sound. The crack came again, closer this time, followed by the faint drag of something rough against metal. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't ice shifting. This was deliberate. They inched forward, every step crunching softly on frozen debris. As Alex reached the end of the aisle, his flashlight beam caught movement, something sliding back into the darkness just out of sight. For a split second, he caught a glimpse. Pale, hairless skin stretched unnaturally thin over a long, bony arm, and fingers, too many fingers, curling back behind the wall panel. Daniel's breathing quickened. "We need to go. Now." But the way back already felt different. The silence had changed. The thing inside the plane wasn't hiding anymore. It was stalking. Alex didn't answer Daniel. He couldn't. His tongue felt like it was made of ice, glued to the roof of his mouth. The two brothers stood frozen, the narrow aisle stretching behind them like a throat ready to swallow them whole. The beam of Alex's flashlight trembled, sliding over cracked seats and frost-covered windows, then stopped. Something was there. A shadow, darker than the darkness itself, clung to the ceiling, motionless, almost invisible if not for the faint glisten of frost forming on its skin. Then it moved, not in a slow, cautious way, not like an animal stalking prey. It slid, fluid and silent, across the ceiling, its limbs bending at impossible angles, its many fingers scraping softly against the metal above their heads. Daniel's voice cracked. "Alex, don't look up." Alex's heart pounded so hard it hurt. He didn't want to, but instinct forced his eyes upward. The thing was right above them. Its eyeless face hovered inches away, head tilting side to side like it was listening to their fear. And then the smell hit. Rot. Decay. Something that had been frozen for decades and was now thawing in the warmth of their presence. The creature's jaw unhinged, not downwards but sideways, stretching far wider than any human's, revealing rows of thin, needle-like teeth. A sound came from deep inside it. A wet, rattling inhale, as if it was breathing them in. Alex took a step back. The creature mirrored him, only upside down, still clinging to the ceiling. They both knew. If they ran, it would chase. If they stayed, it would strike. Alex's fingers fumbled with the latch on the plane's side door, the cold metal biting into his skin. Behind him, Daniel whispered, "It's not moving." He didn't dare look back. If he looked, he might freeze completely. With one final shove, the door gave way, exploding in a burst of blinding white snow and howling wind. The brothers stumbled out onto the tundra, their boots sinking deep into the powder. The freezing air stabbed at their lungs, but it didn't matter. They were outside. They ran. The crunch of their boots was swallowed by the storm. The plane's silhouette vanished behind a curtain of snow. Alex glanced at Daniel. He was pale, gasping, but alive. Finally, after what felt like hours but was only minutes, they collapsed behind a snowdrift, using it as a shield against the wind. Daniel let out a shaky laugh. We made it. We actually made it. Alex wanted to believe it. He wanted to feel relief. But something was wrong. The air was too quiet. Then he heard it, a faint wet click, like claws tapping ice. It was coming from above them. Slowly, both brothers tilted their heads back. The creature was there, perched on top of the snowdrift, its limbs folded in impossible ways, head hanging upside down to look at them. It hadn't chased them. It had followed. And it was smiling. The smile, or whatever that expression was, didn't belong to anything human. Its lips were cracked, pale, and stretched too far over jagged, uneven teeth. Snow clung to its skin like frost on glass, and its eyes. Those eyes were alive. For a moment, nobody moved. Alex's mind screamed run, but his body refused to obey. Daniel's breath came in short, shallow bursts, the kind you hear from prey right before the predator strikes. Then, the thing dropped, no warning. No sound of landing. It simply vanished from the top of the snowdrift and appeared in front of them, crouched low like a spider. Alex grabbed Daniel's arm. "Move!" They scrambled away, snow spraying behind them. The wind roared in their ears. But over it, Alex could hear it, the rhythmic crunch of claws digging into ice, closing the distance. Daniel stumbled, falling face first into the snow. Alex spun around to help him, and in that heartbeat of hesitation, he saw the creature dart forward, not walking, not running, but gliding across the snow like the ground itself was pulling it closer. "Get up! Get up now!" Alex shouted, yanking Daniel to his feet. Somewhere in the chaos, Daniel's backpack tore open, spilling its contents into the storm. A flashlight rolled away, its weak beams slicing through the snow and landing on something metallic, sticking out of the ice. Alex's brain barely registered it. Survival came first. But that glint in the snow felt important. They ran, not realizing the creature had stopped chasing them. It didn't need to. It was herding them, pushing them exactly where it wanted them to go. The storm howled like it was alive, its icy fingers clawing at their faces as Alex and Daniel stumbled forward. Breath tore out of their lungs, but that metallic glint kept flashing in Alex's mind like a warning light. He pulled Daniel toward it. The creature was gone, at least for now, but the feeling of being watched hadn't left. It was heavier, now pressing against the back of their necks. They reached the object. It was half buried in the ice, frozen solid but unmistakable. A piece of fuselage, torn, jagged, and scorched, as if ripped from the belly of the missing plane itself. Daniel, crouched, brushing snow off the metal, his fingers trembling, not just from the cold. "There's writing here," he muttered. Alex squinted, tracing the faded letters with his glove. It wasn't English, at least not completely. The markings looked like serial numbers, but mixed with them were scratched symbols. Symbols that didn't belong on any aircraft. The more Alex stared, the more his stomach churned. The symbols weren't random, they were deliberate, and he'd seen them before. Not in books, not in reports, but on a weathered map pinned in his grandfather's attic. A map with red ink circles marking no-go zones across Alaska. This isn't just wreckage," Alex whispered. Daniel looked up, confused. "It's a warning." From somewhere in the white void behind them, a single sound echoed. 3 slow, deliberate knocks, on metal, not the wind, not the storm. Something else was in the wreckage. Alex's breath fogged in front of him, curling into the freezing air like tiny ghosts. Daniel's eyes darted toward the twisted fuselage, the sound of those 3 knocks still echoing in his skull. For a moment, the storm seemed to pause. No wind, no crunch of snow, just silence. A silence so deep it pressed against their eardrums. Alex stepped closer, his boots sinking into the powder. The fuselage loomed over them, its torn edges jagged like the teeth of some ancient predator. He ran his glove along the metal, feeling the icy burn through the fabric. Then, thump, thump, thump. This time, it was faster, closer, coming from deep inside the wreck. Daniel's breath quickened. Maybe it's a survivor? Alex shook his head slowly. No survivor waits in silence for decades. Still, they couldn't turn back. They pried open the warped hatch, metal screeching in protest. The darkness inside was thick, like stepping into ink. Their flashlights flickered the moment they crossed the threshold. Inside, the air was wrong, not just cold, but stale, unmoving, as if sealed for years. Seats were torn, overhead bins hung open, and frost clung to every surface like a living skin. And then they saw it. At the far end of the aisle, between the shattered rows of seats, a shadow, tall, motionless, its head tilted slightly like it was listening. Alex's flashlight sputtered again, and for a heartbeat, the beam caught a glimpse. Pale, glistening skin stretched too tightly over long, unnatural limbs. And eyes, not human, reflective, like shards of ice catching the light. The thing didn't move. It didn't need to. It already knew. They weren't leaving. Daniel's grip tightened on the flashlight until his knuckles went white beneath his gloves. The beam wavered, landing again on the thing in the aisle, still motionless, still watching. Alex swallowed hard. We need to move. Slowly. Back out. But his voice was barely a whisper, as if speaking louder might draw it closer. Then, a sound, not from the front, from above. A slow, deliberate scrape echoed along the cabin ceiling, metal groaning under weight that wasn't supposed to be there. Daniel jerked his light upward. The beam caught frost flaking down from a luggage rack. And something else. Long, claw-like fingers curling over the edge. The shadow wasn't in the aisle anymore. It was right above them. The plane's structure creaked, and the cold air suddenly carried a smell. Rot. Not the sharp tang of frozen decay, but something damp, ancient, and alive. Daniel stumbled back, bumping into a torn seat. The noise was deafening in the dead air. In an instant, the creature's head snapped downward from the luggage compartment, its jaw unhinged just slightly, enough to reveal jagged, uneven teeth rimmed with frost. Alex's mind screamed, "Run!" But his legs refused to move. The thing leaned forward, its body unfolding with unnatural fluidity, like melting ice reforming into something monstrous. A low, rumbling sound vibrated through the fuselage. Not quite a growl, not quite a hiss. Something worse, it was speaking. But the words weren't human. The sound crawled into their ears like cold fingers slipping under the skin. Daniel's breath misted in frantic bursts, his flashlight beam trembling across the thing's face, or what could barely be called a face. Two deep, hollow pits stared back at him. Not eyes, at least not in any human sense, just black, glistening voids that seemed to pull the light inward, swallowing it whole. The thing's voice rose again, each syllable wet and jagged, like bone dragged across stone. It wasn't speaking to them. It was naming them. Daniel didn't know how he understood that. But every muscle in his body screamed the same message. It knows you now. Alex's knees buckled as the creature dropped from the luggage rack, landing on the aisle floor with a soundless thud. Its movements were impossibly silent, yet every step forward carried a weight that made the metal floor moan. Then it stopped, only inches away. Daniel could feel the cold radiating from it, a living frost that burned worse than fire. His mind spun with one thought. If I move, I'm dead. The creature leaned forward, its head tilting in sharp, unnatural increments, studying him the way a predator studies prey right before the kill. And then it touched him. One claw, ice cold, and razor sharp, rested gently against his chest. The pressure was light, too light. It wasn't trying to hurt him. It was marking him. Daniel's heart slammed in his chest. Somewhere deep in the plain, a second sound rose. Footsteps. Not theirs. Not human. The thing's head snapped toward the noise, and without a sound it slid back into the shadows, disappearing as if it had never been there. But the frost on Daniel's chest remained, and it was spreading. Daniel stumbled back, clutching, his chest where the frost had spread in a spiderweb pattern beneath his jacket. His skin burned from the cold, but it wasn't the pain that made his stomach twist. It was the realization that the mark was alive, pulsing faintly like it had a heartbeat of its own. Alex's whisper cracked the silence. "Dan, listen, they..." Froze. The sound was faint at first, soft, wet dragging like something heavy sliding along the floor, but then another sound joined it. Click, 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 like claws tapping on metal, getting closer and closer. There's more than one," Alex said, his voice trembling. The cabin lights flickered once, twice, and then failed entirely, plunging them into absolute darkness. No moonlight. No flashlight. Nothing. And in that blackness, the noises multiplied. The dragging was now coming from both ends of the plane. The tapping echoed from the ceiling. The walls seemed to breathe. Daniel's mind raced. How many were there? 2? 3? Or had they stepped into a nest? A sudden rush of icy wind blew down the aisle, carrying with it the faint coppery scent of blood. Daniel could hear Alex's breath speeding up, almost hyperventilating. He reached out to grab him. But instead of Alex's jacket, his hand closed around something wet. It twitched. Daniel yanked his hand back with a gasp, the slick, icy moisture clinging to his fingers. Whatever it was, it had moved. Before either of them could react, the emergency lighting sputtered, buzzed, and for just 1 second, the plane's interior lit up in a sickly red glow. In that single heartbeat of illumination, Daniel saw everything. A shape crouched on the ceiling, its limbs bent at impossible angles, head cocked unnaturally toward them. Its skin was the same pale, translucent white as the ice outside, except for the black veins spidering across its body. Its mouth wasn't a mouth at all, but a torn opening that pulsed like a wound, and dangling from that jagged hole, a strip of fabric. Daniel's eyes locked on it. It was the same blue as Alex's scarf. Then, darkness slammed back like a door shutting, leaving them blind again. There was no sound now. No dragging, no clicking, only silence. The kind of silence where you know something is watching, Alex whispered, his voice breaking. "Dan, it was right above us." Daniel's breath came in shallow bursts, each one fogging in the freezing air. His hands were trembling, not from the cold, but from the certainty that it hadn't moved away. It was still there. A faint crack echoed overhead. The old fuselage groaned as ice shifted along the ceiling. Alex's flashlight wavered in his grip, the beam sweeping across torn seats, shattered windows. Then up. The light caught a glimpse of something wet. Dripping, drip, drip, drip. The drops were dark, thick, and steaming in the cold. Blood, fresh blood. Before they could process it, bang! The ceiling above them exploded downward in a storm of twisted metal and snow. The thing dropped between them, a blur of pale limbs and jagged claws, letting out a guttural shriek that rattled the air inside the cabin. It was fast, unnaturally fast, lunging for Daniel's throat before he even had time to lift his arms. Alex screamed, swinging the flashlight with all his strength, smashing it against the creature's face. Glass shattered, plunging them into complete darkness again. But now there was movement everywhere, a rush of scraping, the thud of claws on metal, the hiss of something breathing inches from their skin. Daniel fumbled blindly for his pack. His fingers brushed something cold, not metal, not ice, a hand, but it wasn't Alex's. Daniel jerked his hand back as if he'd touched fire, but it was too late. The cold, leathery fingers clamped around his wrist with inhuman strength, yanking him forward so hard his knees smashed into the broken aisle. The creature's breath washed over his face, hot, moist, and carrying a stench like rotting meat buried under ice for decades. He could hear it smiling. "Daniel!" Alex's voice was sharp, panicked, somewhere to his left. But the thing dragged Daniel away in a burst of violent motion, slamming his back into the jagged wall of the fuselage. Metal tore into his jacket, warm blood blooming instantly. A deep, guttural growl rose from the darkness, vibrating through the cabin's metal walls. Then, without warning, pain exploded in Daniel's shoulder as razor-sharp teeth sank in. He screamed, his voice swallowed by the howling wind outside. Alex stumbled forward, hands sweeping blindly until they found the cold grip of his flare gun. With shaking fingers, he aimed toward the sound. Whoosh! The red flare burst to life, flooding the cabin with flickering, hellish light. For the first time, they saw it fully. A pale, elongated body, skin stretched tight over bone, black eyes like empty pits, and a mouth far too wide, dripping with Daniel's blood. The creature hissed, not in fear, but in rage. It let go of Daniel and launched straight at Alex. The flare's sizzling light threw the whole cabin into a nightmare painting, shadows twisting like living things, every jagged edge of broken metal glowing in crimson. Alex barely had a second before the creature slammed into him, the impact knocking the air from his lungs. They both crashed onto the frozen aisle, the flare rolling away, casting frantic red flashes across the walls. Alex's hands went up instinctively, one gripping the creature's bony throat, the other pushing against its chest, but it was like trying to stop a charging bull. The thing's face came within inches of his, its jaws snapping, ropes of saliva and blood swinging between its teeth. Daniel, still clutching his bleeding shoulder, staggered to his feet. "Alex, move!" he shouted, his voice raw with panic. The creature swiped with clawed fingers, tearing a strip of fabric from Alex's coat and part of the skin beneath. White-hot pain shot through him. He roared in desperation, driving his knee into its gut. The thing barely flinched. Then Alex spotted it. The flare, lying just behind the monster. Its red fire was burning lower but still strong enough. Summoning every bit of strength, Alex twisted hard, letting the creature's weight roll them both toward it. His hand shot out. Got it. Without hesitation, he jammed the burning flare straight into the thing's side. The cabin filled with an unholy shriek, high-pitched and bone-rattling, as the creature thrashed violently, its pale skin blistering where the flare touched. The smell of burning flesh mixed with the icy air, making Daniel gag. The monster recoiled, retreating deeper into the shadows. But the flare's glow revealed something that made both men freeze. There wasn't just one set of eyes staring back at them. The flare's dying glow illuminated the cabin just enough to reveal dozens of pale forms huddled in the shadows. Not one. Not two. Dozens. They clung to the walls, the ceiling, even hanging upside down from shattered overhead racks. Their black, hollow eyes reflected the flare's red light like shards of obsidian. Each movement was slow but deliberate, limbs bending, in ways that made Alex's stomach twist. The creature he had just fought let out a guttural hiss, signaling or commanding the others. They shifted as one, sliding from the shadows, forming a moving wall of death. Daniel clutched his shoulder, blood dripping into the snow-dusted aisle. We're trapped," he choked, eyes wide with terror. Alex's mind raced. The flare was low, the creature too fast, too many. The only option, run. He grabbed Daniel's arm. "Follow me, to the rear exit!" But as they sprinted, the cabin seemed to stretch impossibly long. The creatures weren't chasing yet. They were blocking. Exits, stepping silently into each pathway they tried to take. The metallic walls groaned as more of the pale horde shifted closer. Alex could feel it in his chest. The panic, the inevitability, the cold grip of fear tightening around his ribcage. One of the creatures slid from the ceiling, dropping directly in front of them. Its face tilted, teeth snapping with a wet, rasping sound. Daniel froze. Alex swung, but there was nothing to hit. The thing was already gone, melted into the shadows like smoke. From somewhere above, another hiss echoed. And then a hand reached down from the ceiling, long and thin, brushing against Alex's back. Alex yanked Daniel forward, his legs pumping hard against the icy floor. Every step echoed like a death knell, but it didn't matter. The creatures were already in motion. They flowed down the aisles, sliding over seats, limbs bending at impossible angles. Their movements were synchronized, like a single organism controlling dozens of bodies. Every exit they tried was blocked by a pale shadow, or a glint of black eyes. Daniel stumbled, and one creature's clawed hand shot out from the ceiling, grazing his back. He screamed, dragging himself upright, adrenaline burning the pain away. Alex spotted a narrow passage near the rear fuselage, a service hatch partially buried under frost. "There! We can fit through!" he shouted. They dove for it, shoving aside frozen debris. One creature latched onto Daniel's ankle, but Alex yanked him free with a feral strength born of fear. The hatch led to a cramped crawl space, narrow and twisting. Snow and ice coated every surface. They could hear the horde moving above them, claws tapping, bodies scraping metal, a low hiss resonating through the cabin. Halfway through, Daniel whispered, breath ragged, "Alex, we can't keep this up forever." Alex didn't answer, focused on the crawl, ignoring the frozen tears stinging his eyes. The creature's sounds grew fainter, but not gone. It was a temporary reprieve, a trap in the silence. As they emerged from the crawl space into another chamber, a single beam of moonlight cut through the wreckage. For the first time, they saw it. The plane's inner fuselage opened to the tundra, outside. Freedom was so close, but as they bolted toward the opening, movement caught their eyes. Two creatures had dropped silently from the ceiling, blocking the exit, limbs folded impossibly, heads tilting in unison. The horde had split, one chasing, one waiting. Alex and Daniel exchanged a glance. Fear and desperation mirrored in each other's eyes. And then from the far end of the fuselage, a low, guttural roar echoed. The creatures coordinated, advancing like predators closing in for the final strike. The tundra wind bit through their jackets, freezing Alex and Daniel's limbs as they burst out of the fuselage. Snow whipped their faces, eyes stinging, but freedom was just steps away. They turned to see the creatures pouring out behind them, sliding over metal, limbs snapping in impossible angles, eyes glowing faintly in the moonlight. Alex spotted a ridge ahead, higher ground. "Climb!" he yelled, dragging Daniel across the snow. The creatures were faster than anticipated. One lunged for Daniel, slamming into his shoulder and sending him rolling into the snow. Pain flared, but he scrambled upright. Alex picked up a frozen branch, swinging with all his strength. The thing hissed, recoiling, but its companions closed in. They reached the ridge, panting, frostbite stinging their fingers. Below, the tundra stretched endlessly, untouched, cold, merciless. Alex glanced back. Creatures were on the ridge now, scrambling like spiders, their clawed hands gouging the snow. Desperation surged. Alex grabbed Daniel's hand. "Jump! Now!" They leapt into a snow-filled ravine, rolling down the slope. The creatures hesitated at the edge, then skidded down after them, but the snow slowed them. Their speed wasn't human, but gravity was merciless. Alex and Daniel tumbled into a shallow ditch, gasping, battered. The creatures stopped at the ravine's edge, snarling, before melting back into the shadows. Silence fell. The wind howled. Snow drifted over their tracks. They survived. But the tundra had claimed its secret once more, and the memory of those hollow eyes would never leave them. Alex and Daniel lay in the snow, chests heaving, frost forming on their eyelashes. They were alive, but just barely. Cuts, bruises, and deep scratches marred their bodies. Blood mixed with snow, freezing into dark patches. Daniel whispered, Did we really make it?" Alex swallowed, staring at the endless white horizon. For now. Yes. But they're still out there, watching. They struggled to stand, each movement sending sharp pains through battered limbs. Their breath came in ragged clouds, their minds replaying every moment of the chase. Every hollow eye, every jagged mouth, every unnatural movement. As they trudged toward what they hoped was civilization, Alex glanced back once. Through the haze of snow, the shadow of a figure lingered on a distant ridge. Not moving, not attacking, just watching. Daniel shivered. "Do you think more are coming?" Alex didn't answer. He didn't have to. The silence said it all. The tundra had swallowed the plane, the wreckage, the creatures, and yet the feeling of being hunted remained. A gnawing, icy truth settled in their bones. The nightmare wasn't over. Far behind, a faint sound echoed across the snow, a soft, scraping noise like claws against ice, growing slowly louder. They weren't alone, and somewhere in the frozen expanse, the creatures waited, patient, silent, immortal in the tundra's grasp. Weeks later, Alex and Daniel were back in the city, wrapped in warm blankets, their bodies recovering but their minds forever changed. News reports covered a missing expedition in Alaska, but no one mentioned the plane. No one knew what had been hiding in the ice. Alex stared at the map in his apartment, his grandfather's old map with red ink circles marking no-go zones. He traced a finger over the tundra where they had found the plane, a chill running down his spine. Daniel broke the silence. "Do you think they followed us?" Alex didn't answer. He didn't need to. In the corner of the room, shadows flickered. A chill wind whispered through the cracked window, even though it was tightly shut, and then, in the quiet, a faint tapping echoed from the street below. Click, click, click. The brothers froze. The sound was too deliberate, too calculated. Somewhere in the world, the creatures waited, patient, silent, hungry, and Alex realized no one would ever be truly safe again. The camera of the audience's imagination lingered on that tapping sound, and just like that, the FOMO and suspense gripped them. What happens next? The tundra keeps its secrets. For now.